Welcome to Baylor Spotlight, a weekly show featuring interviews with prominent community figures. Brought to you by KWBU in conjunction with the Baylor Lariat. The Baylor Lariat, rounding up campus news since 1900. Today's guests are Frank Fallon, former voice of the Baylor Bears and the Final Four, who currently serves as general manager of KWBU, and John Morris, director of broadcasting at Baylor University. Mr. Fallon, how did you get your start in radio?
Well, Michael, I started in 1948 with a radio station in San Antonio, and that's over 50 years ago, of course, now, and decided a long time ago, as a matter of fact, even as a youngster, that I wanted to be into broadcasting, and was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to go to work on the weekends for radio station KITE in San Antonio. And to show you just how far back that was, we were playing 78 RPM discs. We had wire recorders, didn't even have tape recorders at that time. And our mobile news unit was a fire engine.
What were some of the other stations you worked at or other broadcasting jobs you held in the early days?
Well, really, there was only one other station that I worked for, was KWTX here in Waco. I came here in 1953 after I got out of the service and stayed there until 1981 when I came to Baylor. So really just two radio stations, three if you include KWBU, but only two that I worked for on the air.
How did you get started at Baylor University?
Well, I assume you're asking the question about when I started as far as sports broadcasting was concerned. In 1953, when I came here, the job of radio play-by-play for Baylor football and basketball had come open. I don't think there was anything that was ever done on a bid basis. KWTX was just the acknowledged station that carried Baylor football and basketball. And the year that I got here, the gentleman that had been doing the games decided to go into the record business, a fellow by the name of Gerald McCracken, who founded Word Record Company. And they needed somebody to do football and basketball. And I had never done either one, having only worked in San Antonio for a couple of years before I went into service. But like anything else in this business, I learned you don't ever say you don't know how to do it, because if you do, you're liable to never get another chance. So I said, of course I can do it. And so the first Southwest Conference football and or basketball game that I ever saw, I was broadcasting for Baylor University and KWTX. So being in the right place at the right time was certainly the answer that I'd have to give you, and that's the best example of it I can think of.
How did you develop your skills in sports broadcasting at that point?
Oh, Michael, I think just a genuine interest in the sports themselves, knowing that that's what you wanted to do, knowing that there were opportunities out there for you, seeing good things happen for you as a result of your follow-through and your basic knowledge. I don't think you can falsely inject interest or enthusiasm in any kind of broadcasting, but particularly in sports. I think it has to be there, be a genuine product, and with me it was and is, and that was I think the secret of my getting started.
And what were some of the positions you've done? Basketball, you've done football at Baylor University. Do you have any interesting stories from either of those experiences?
Oh, there are just a lot of things that happened over the course of the years. I think about a story that I like to tell. When I started doing the Final Four public address work in 1978, in 1981, the day of the Final Four championship game, the president was shot, President Reagan was shot, and there was a great deal of concern about whether they should play the national championship game that night or whether it should be televised if they did play it. So the game was to be played in the Spectrum down in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and so I remember going back into the archives of the Coliseum, and there was Bobby Knight and Dean Smith, two of the most highly respected basketball coaches in the country, sitting on a couple of orange crates trying to decide with NBC officials, and NBC had the rights at that time, whether or not to play this national championship game, and if they did play it, to televise it. That was one of the more interesting things. There have been a lot of great funny stories that you come across during the course of 42 years, which was my 10 years as a Baylor broadcaster, but they don't all rush into your memory at the same time. You're aware of the fact that there were a lot of great things that happened and a lot of experiences that you wouldn't trade for, but you're not sure how you got through them in the first place.
How did you get the job with the Final Four?
Well, through an audition process. The director of media relations for the NCAA was a former Baylor graduate, had been a Baylor publicist here for a number of years, And when he went to the NCAA and was given the responsibility of administering the Final Four, one of the things he wanted to do was to give a uniform look to the entire process. So he hired a public address announcer, a statistician, a stats crew, a crew of sports information directors to administer the entire proceedings. And he asked me to send in tape for an audition to the NCAA finals. Well, you don't have many tapes for auditions for PA work, I found. So I went over to the Heart of Texas Coliseum, turned out all the lights, and simulated what I thought was the work of a responsible PA guy for a half, and sent the tape into the NCAA and was accepted, and did my first game in Final Four, first 3 games I should say, in 1978, and continued through San Antonio last year for 21 years.
1998 was your last year doing the Final Four announcing work. What led you to retire from that?
Well, my retirement was general. At the end of the 1995 season at Baylor, the basketball season was the last time. I'd had some health problems and realized, I was 65 years old at the time, that this was the time to step down. And the Final Four was being held in San Antonio, which is my hometown, where I went to school and where my wife went to school and where 2 of my children were born. So it looked like a pretty good idea. I thought the good Lord was just telling me something that I needed to know, and that was that it was a good time to step down and end it in San Antonio, which is what I did.
All right, John Morris, Director of Broadcasting here at Baylor University. How did you get your start in broadcasting the business?
Michael, thanks for asking. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I grew up in Kentucky, graduated from high school in Danville, Kentucky, Danville High School. And there was a guy in our church that pretty much ran the local radio station. Danville's a small city, 2, I guess, an AM and an automated FM. And he did just about everything on the AM, and that included all the sports. I knew him from our church, so I started hanging around him, and he would let me sit by him at some games and things like that. And I guess that is the initial, my introduction to broadcasting. I've always liked sports. Sports has always been there. And the more I hung around him, the more I went to games. I thought, this would be a pretty fun way to make a living if you combine sports and broadcasting. So I guess that was the start of it.
And then you came to Baylor after that?
Yes, I started Baylor in 1977, graduated from Baylor in December of 1980, majored in radio TV, got my degree in that, worked pretty much all the way through school, worked at a couple of radio stations around town, and then by the time I graduated, I was working at a TV station here in Waco.
And that station was KWTX, Channel 10.
Right, right.
And tell us about those years.
Well, they were great. They were really great. I was very fortunate in that I got a job there, got my foot in the door my junior year at Baylor, and hung around for 15 years after that. But I knew I wanted to be in sports. There were no openings in sports when I started. But as I tell a lot of students these days, the first step is the hardest step. Get your foot in the door, get that first job. Then you can sort of work your way and ease your way into the position that you'd ultimately like to be in. I started in news, did news reporting, did a lot of photography. And, in fact, I was working full-time, 5 days a week, the 40 hours I would do my news, and then I would come in on my days off and do sports because they couldn't assign me news stories because those were my days off. So that's how it started at KWTX TV. Frank was there at that time for just a brief time after I started. I started in February of 80, and he was there for a brief time as the KWTX radio station manager. So we crossed paths there, and then obviously I've known him since that time and a little bit before.
Right. Basically, two started working together in Baylor sports. What year was that?
We started doing the football games together in the 1987 football season. Prior to that, there were several setups really, and Frank, you could talk about some of those. There was the old. I mean, it goes way back to the Humble days, right?
Yeah, that's right. You're talking about my radio?
Yeah. As far as the football setup with the Southwest Conference?
Yeah, I guess it was back in 1935 that the Humble Oil and Refining Company acquired the broadcast rights to the Southwest Conference football games, and all the schools thought they were getting a great deal. I think they wound up getting a highlights film and a free lunch, and that was their payment for the broadcast rights to football in the Southwest Conference.
Not a lot of money involved then, was
it? Not a whole lot, and the strange thing was that You broadcast. Sometimes you broadcast a Baylor game. The next week you may do a Texas game. You may do an A&M game the week after that. There have been some strange situations. The mutual broadcasting system, John, as you know, and I don't know how much of this I'm rambling into, but in the early days when Humble Oil and Refining Company, which is now Exxon, had the broadcast rights, they would give you 4 one-minute commercials and tell you if you got them in during the broadcast, that was fine. If you didn't, don't worry about it. Yeah, if you can believe that.
That's changed a little today,
That's changed a little bit. Changed when Mutual took it over. Mutual, bless their hearts, they didn't really have any idea what they were doing. They came down from New York and decided to administer Southwest Conference football on the Mutual Radio Network. And suddenly, instead of 4 commercials per game, we were trying to do 4 commercials per minute. They were taking timeouts on punts and getting back into play-by-play, missing touchdowns. Oh, it was a bad situation. And Mutual was finally salvaged by Jim Host in 1986, I believe, 84, 85, somewhere in there. And I think that was really the best day, or those were the best days the Southwest Conference ever had as far as its radio was concerned. That's where you and I started together. I think our first broadcast was out at Las Vegas, wasn't it?
That was one of the first ones. That's right.
One of the early ones.
That's right. And the way Host Communications did it for a while there is each school would have their local team, right, a play-by-play and a color guy. And then once it got to conference games, there would be one representative from each school, and the feed would then go to both those schools' networks.
And really made you a much better broadcaster, I thought, John, because you had to prepare play-by-play one week and color the next week, and the preparation for the two is totally different. And I think, as I said, those were the best days for the Southwest Conference, or maybe for any network, as far as the way Jim Host exercised his option in running the network. It worked out awfully well.
It was very well run. Host and Host Communications, very, very good operation. And our friend Bill O'Connell was sort of in charge of that as the executive producer of the Southwest Conference Radio Network. And then you remember how it all came tumbling down, don't you?
Well, as I recall, Jackie Sherrill down at Texas A&M decided that he didn't want anybody else being on the Aggie broadcast, and he decided he wanted to do it differently.
And he thought they could make more money themselves doing it themselves than they could through the cooperative effort through the Southwest Conference. So I remember the day you came to me and said, well, you'll have one more game to do next year, because it would have been the A&M game. It would have been the non-conference games and the A&M game, and then within a month after that, all of a sudden we were doing every game together because the whole thing had fallen apart, basically, because A&M pulled out.
We had our own Baylor network, and from that day forward, that's what we did. Baylor football, every game was on the Baylor Radio Network, and well, you've had it for the last 4 or 5 years. It's still changing, isn't it?
It changes. It seems like almost daily, and it's interesting to be on the inside and see the changes. That's a real revenue producer for the university and for the athletic department now. And not only that, more important than that, I think, is just to get the word of Baylor University out. Our current athletic director, Tom Stanton, and our president, Dr. Sloan, see the importance of athletics as being the window to the university. And that's, I think, maybe the major input we can have through doing our game broadcast.
John, I think one of the nicest things that you've been able to accomplish, and one of the best things for Baylor, is lining up WBAP and its 50,000-watt voice of the entire country. I think they get into 38 states at night, and you've got Baylor football and basketball on WBAP, and that's a real feather in your cap.
Yeah, well, thanks, and I can't take credit for that, actually. It's a pretty good story of how Baylor landed WBAP, and it is great to know that when you're doing a game broadcast at night, it's going into 38 states, as you said. My dad was in Kentucky, and he could listen to the games in Kentucky when they were a night game on WBAP. The way that all came about is that a few years ago, several schools were making bids to WBAP to carry their games. It was very close. When things started, I think Baylor was about 5th in the pecking order, if I remember right. TCU was a pretty strong number 1. Texas was in there. SMU was in there. A&M, Tech, and then Baylor, I think, in that order. But as the bid process went along, Baylor kept inching its way forward. Came down to the final day when WBAP was going to make their decision. It was really close, almost neck and neck between at least 2, maybe more schools. And John Fletcher, who runs an ad agency in Waco, he was sort of heading up Baylor's bid to get WBAP. His great coup de grace in the final bid was to go into the meeting and have someone wearing the Bear mascot suit and delivering bear claws to the people at WBAP. And by doing that, I don't know if that sealed it for Baylor, but it certainly didn't hurt. And we've had a good association for them now. As we tape this, we're in our 4th year with WBAP.
We'll be back with more Baylor Spotlight right after this.
Hunger is not about the lack of food. It's about poverty, conflict, indifference. 800 million people are hungry. It's your world. Be connected. Get involved. The World Bank. Knowledge and resources for change. Call toll-free 1-888-65-WORLD.
107.1 FM KWBU Radio Free Waco.
Welcome back to Baylor Spotlight. Mr. Fallon, I'm sure a lot of people out there are wondering how you and John got started together.
I want to say publicly, as I have every opportunity I have had since I retired 5 years ago, that John was just a natural successor. I saw his work at KWTX when we worked together on the Baylor Football Network. I knew that, there's a certain chemistry that two guys working together either have or don't have. And there was no doubt in my mind that we had that chemistry from the very beginning. I think John understood what I wanted him to do from the very beginning, and now the roles have changed. We're working Baylor baseball where John is in the driver's seat, and where I just come in to try to help him a little bit, and I try to anticipate what help he needs. But he's in every respect of the word a truly professional broadcaster, and I wouldn't have selected anybody else. As a matter of fact, the opportunity came along a couple of times to make a change, and I wasn't about to do that. We had a good thing going, and I'm proud of the years that we spent together, and glad that he enjoys letting the old man come along on baseball every now and then. That's a lot of fun. We've had more fun in the last 2 or 3 years on baseball than we have in a lot of things. It's just been a real pleasure for me.
I appreciate you saying that, and it really goes back to 1984. You were doing, of course, Baylor basketball and football, but during basketball season, you were doing a lot of TV games also. And there were some that were conflicts with a Baylor game on Saturday. So a Vanderbilt game, Baylor and Vanderbilt in the heart of Texas Coliseum was the first Baylor basketball game I ever did, and it was that '84 season.
Is that right?
And you asked me to do those games, filling in for you. And why you asked me, I never will know, because I didn't have a tape I could give you, and I had not done basketball at that level. I'd done some high school basketball, was really it. But so that was definitely learning on the job, starting in 1984, doing Baylor basketball.
Well, I think that there again, that comes down to that same idea. I had confidence in you because I knew you'd get the job done. There are certain young people that you will put forth whatever effort is necessary to do the job, and I never had a moment's doubt about it. I said, it's yours, and you take it and run with it.
And Michael, there'll be time or maybe times in your life you'll see coming up that'll stand out so clear in your mind you'll never forget them. One for me, from a professional standpoint, was had to been in the spring of '86, I guess. And Frank and I happened to be at the heart of Texas Coliseum, and we were standing together watching basketball practice. And Frank, you probably won't even remember this, but very nonchalantly you said, I think we'll make a change in football next year, talking about the broadcast. And I said, oh, really? What are you going to do? And he said, well, I'd like for you to work with me doing the Baylor games.
I do you remember that? Yes, I do.
Well, I will never. I mean, I could tell you the place I was standing on the floor when we had that conversation.
I don't remember that.
Because it was so interesting. It was very low key, very nonchalant, Michael. But it's one of those times that certainly changed my professional life. And I appreciate the years that Frank and I had working together. I wish we could have more of those. There just aren't enough these days. We do baseball, and those games go by too quickly. I wish there were more times that we could still be working together.
Let's talk about a little bit about Baylor sports. How do you see the baseball team doing this year?
You talking to John or me?
Either one.
Go ahead.
Well, I've only been out to one practice so far, and I think they're well equipped to have a good season. They've got some outstanding returning players. They've got some new players that Steve has recruited, Steve Smith, and I think they've got a coaching staff that's a good one. So I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be as good as they were last year, and they finished second in the league last year.
John?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really great year. I'm ready for a great year in a sport. It's been rough in football. It's been rough up to this point in basketball. So I'm really looking forward to baseball. I think Steve Smith, and not only Steve, but his assistant coaches, Mitch Thompson and Steve Johnigan and Mark Reardon have done a good job of recruiting and preparing this team. They are very, very businesslike in every practice, very organized in the things they do, and he has some good players out there. What Steve said going into this year is they may not be as good or better in their top 9 this year than last year, but through their top 25 players, which they'll travel to conference games, he thinks they're better and deeper this year. So to me, that says that this is going to be a really good team and has a chance to be better than the one that won 41 games last year.
John, do you think the team will be adversely affected in any way in not having a home place to play for at least the first part of the season?
I don't know. You would like to have that stadium completely finished and these guys really to enjoy it to its fullest, but at least the home games are at MCC. They're not that far away. They'll get some practice time in there that the other schools won't that come into town, so maybe there'll still be some kind of home field advantage. I think you lose a little bit, but hopefully these guys, except for the ones that are seniors this year, can look what's coming down the road when that stadium's completely finished and be patient, which hopefully the fans will be the same way.
Are they going to call it the Baylor Ballpark?
So far, it could be, for the right amount, it could be the Fallon Ballpark.
It might still be the Baylor Ballpark.
When do you think that construction project's going to be complete?
Well, I have no idea. They say the first home game of March the 26th, I believe.
February 26th.
February 26th with Kansas State is supposed to be played there, but I don't know. I've got my doubts. I don't know. They're going to have to pour a lot of concrete and put up a lot of steel between now and then. I'd love to think so, but I really don't know, Michael. I have no idea. Do you, John?
I think, well, just going by what Waco Construction says, and they keep saying that it will be playable on February 26th, and I hope they're right. I don't think it'll be completely completed until the summer after this season, but it will be complete enough to play some games there this year, which is good for this class of seniors, which have really been very, very accomplished for Baylor baseball. So it's good that they'll get to play their senior season in this ballpark.
Right.
Will there be enough seating for folks to sit and watch some games?
I think so, and they'll just keep working during the week, between games and keep adding seats each week. So it won't be complete. Probably every seat won't be in this year, but the big test, I think, will come second weekend in April when Texas plays here. That'll be the first game they've targeted to have the lights back up because, with all the construction, there's no lights right now. There'll be all-day games at home until then. Plus, what kind of crowds Baylor-Texas series gets. So I think that'll be the real test. That'll stretch the possibilities of the new stadium in April.
And that leads me to asking the question, we've been in the Big 12 now for about 3 years, and we have a lot of construction projects going on, which probably can be attributed to joining the Big 12 somewhat. How do you feel, or what do you think about the Big 12 now that Baylor's been in it for a while? How do you feel that's worked out?
Well, I'm not I'm not in the mix as I was before I retired, Michael. So I'm not sure that I have the tools to answer that for you, other than just being an outside observer. Obviously, we haven't done very well. We've had some pretty disastrous football seasons. We've had 3 football coaches now in the last 4 years. 5 years, I guess it was. We're right now, as we tape this, mired in the 10-game losing streak in basketball. And we have one championship, and that's the women's soccer, as you know. And of course, we've already lost our coach who went to Notre Dame. So right now, I'm quite frankly a little disappointed. We haven't accomplished nearly as much as I had hoped Baylor would. I remember back when the initial announcement was made at the press conference, Dr. Reynolds, who was then the president, said, if you want to run with the big dogs, you got to get off the porch. Well, I'm afraid we haven't gotten down the steps yet. We're still on the porch. We're not running with the big dogs as well as I'd like for us to, and I can say that probably a little more freely than somebody that's directly associated with Baylor, but we're not as far along as we need to be in order to be competitive in this league.
John?
I think, I agree with you, Frank. No Baylor fan is happy about the success so far and the wins and losses in the Big 12 so far. But I think there's a place for Baylor in the Big 12. The folks who say Baylor should be kicked out or should leave the Big 12 conference, I think that's premature. There is so much emphasis put on the main 2 marquee sports, that being football and men's basketball. I think people look at those two, see how a school is doing, and really evaluate the athletic department because of those two sports. But there are 15 other sports at Baylor. Go down the list, compare all of those, and see how Baylor stacks up. As Frank said, soccer won the Big 12 championship last year in only its third year of existence. And the unfortunate thing is that Baylor has hit a slide in those top two sports, football and men's basketball, right at the time that they made the move into the Big 12. So the perception nationwide and maybe around the Big 12 conference is that Baylor can't compete, can't play in the Big 12. But I think given time, Tom Stanton has things going in the right direction. All the building projects, I think, are a very, very positive sign that Baylor's here to stay, and don't, as Mark Twain said, maybe rumors of Baylor's demise in the Big 12 conference are greatly exaggerated. Did Mark Twain say that?
Yeah, I think he did.
Okay.
If he didn't, he should have. The Big 12 Track and Field Championships, Michael, will be here at Baylor for the second time in the 3 years that we've been in the league. That's a feather in our cap. And Coach Clyde Hart's track teams, both men and women, are certainly very competitive. And I think John put it very correct when he said that it just so happened that our getting into the Big 12 came at the same time that our football and basketball programs really slid to the bottom. So we'll come back, but it's kind of tough waiting.
It might surprise some people, Frank, to know that Baylor finished fifth the last year in the Big 12 all-sports standings. Fifth is pretty good. I mean, that's the upper half of the conference. That's taking all the sports in which a school competes and rating it against the other schools, behind only Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas A&M, I think, and then Baylor was fifth. So that's ahead of a lot of other schools, Oklahoma State, Missouri, Kansas State. Kansas State has had such a great football program, got all the national attention there. Well, they were last in the Big 12 all-sports standings. So, I don't hear any move to kick Kansas State out of the Big 12 conference either.
What's going on as far as Baylor Stadium is concerned, Floyd Casey? There's a lot of, doesn't look the same.
Boy, it's a press box and luxury suite construction, which right now is actually press box destruction because they have gutted that whole thing. The outer walls are about the only thing left on the backside, but it's going to be nice. It's going to be a brand new press box, adding 35 luxury suites. And here's the thing that's encouraging to me is even though Baylor's gone 2-9 and 2-9 the last 2 years in football, Jim Huey and Darrell Lanus and Tom Stanton have sold 23 of the 35 luxury suites that are available. So I think that's a pretty good sign.
No, I agree. You're right, certainly. It's just hard to be patient sometimes, and sometimes it just takes a little patience to get where you want to go.
A lot of folks are going to say that they've been patient for a long time, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Nobody more so than me.
Right.
I'd like to close and basically by saying that I know John thanks you very much, Mr. Fallon, and I definitely thank you because you've been working here as general manager of KWBU Radio since 1981, and you've had many students pass through here and end up in successful careers in radio. And I'd just like to take the time to personally thank you for what you've done for me personally and representing those people. And I know John thanks you for what you've taught him over the years.
Well, you're not the prettiest program director I ever had, McGuff, but you're one of the most efficient, and I appreciate the hours that you put in here at the station. Nobody knows exactly what you do that keeps you here all night, as a matter of fact, sometimes, and we talked about that. That's counterproductive. You don't want to do that. But it's a great deal of fun for me to look back and see people like you and John, a lot of other young folks that have been a part of my existence here at Baylor and elsewhere, and say it's been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to more years of it.
Anything to add, John?
No, I just echo what you said, Frank. We sort of missed each other in that I was already out of school before you started down here at Baylor full time. But I think we've made up for it in the time since then. And I just appreciate, as I said earlier, every minute we have had to work together and look forward to many more in the years to come. And Baylor is very, very fortunate to have Frank Fallon.
I would like to thank Mr. Fallon and John Morris for being here. Join us next time for another edition of Baylor Spotlight. I'm Michael McGuff.